Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another rendition of the Narrative Avengers series. This period of early voting, we're really hoping that everyone gets out and uses your power at the ballot box to make your voice heard this election season. I was really encouraged today. I saw an article in the Dispatch that said the number of people who've early voted is up significantly. More than 40,000 people have voted early this cycle than in 2018. So that's really encouraging to hear. We have just about how many days left of the election? We have just a little over a week, or 2 weeks it
Yeah,
feels. It's come down to the wire. So today we're really grateful to be here with Chris Tavener from the Ohio Environmental Council. We're going to be talking with Chris about issues of dealing with our climate. And as we all know, there's sort of this existential threat hanging over us every day. As we look around the world and hear about all the natural disasters that are happening, or those of us. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the power outages that happened here in Ohio over the summer with Chris. And for me, when I think about the climate and just sort of our general movement for justice in this country, I often think of like a basketball game where we're coming back from behind, and we got momentum. But the clock is ticking down, and the question is: Are we gonna be able to do enough, to build enough power, to get enough wins before that clock runs out? I know a couple of years ago, in 2015, when the Paris Accord was signed, there was a lot of talk about sort of setting thresholds for limiting warming, and we're going to exceed those undoubtedly. But that's why I'm really excited to be talking with you, Chris, to be learning more about the work that OEC is doing. The Ohio Environmental Council, y'all are working with leaders all across the state who are engaged in the fight for climate justice, and it gives me a lot of hope and a lot of gratitude because I could just go on and on about my existential dread whenever the climate stuff comes up. So, Chris, would you introduce yourself? Take a couple minutes, just let people know who you are and how you got involved in this work with OEC.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, James. It's always great to chat with you. My name is Chris Tavener. I'm the Associate General Counsel and Managing Director of Democracy Policy for the Ohio Environmental Council. I use he, him pronouns. You started us talking about climate change, and for me, it's all about climate change, the threat of climate change, and kind of the existential dread. But really, more particularly, it's about fighting against the individuals and companies that continue to prop up the causes of climate change. That's what brings me to work every day. We can't really stop until Ohioans and the people across the world have control of their own environmental futures. What's funny is that in addition to working in the climate space, I now heavily work in the democracy space too, especially in the redistricting fight. When I left law school, I never would have imagined that I'd be diving into democracy work, but over the years, I've truly realized that it's fundamentally important in the fight against the climate crisis that we also have a profoundly healthy democracy. To combat the powerful interest causing climate change, we need to realize the profound collective power of the people to stand up against those interests.
Yeah, no, that's so powerful. Yeah, I've been reflecting lately just on how dire the situation with our democracy is here in Ohio in particular, but across the country. I mean, we have folks certainly voting on maps that have been ruled unconstitutional. You bring up the work you've been engaged in around redistricting, and we have a small group of people who are trying to hijack our democracy. And you're right. We need to have a functioning democracy in order to win the battles we need to win to make a difference in our climate. So I'm wondering, what are some ways that people can make a difference this cycle? How can people use their voices, their votes, to get involved in the fight this November?
Yeah, so for many of the OEC's members, climate change is the number one concern on their minds. What that looks like in different communities takes a lot of different forms. Some communities in Ohio are particularly concerned with how climate change is already affecting them right now. Increased floods, heat waves, other similar impacts. Other Ohioans want to have the opportunity to own the solutions to climate change, whether that's through having utility scale renewable projects come into their community, or by directly owning their own electricity with solar panels on their home or business. Ohioans are also concerned about the affordability of electricity, the affordability of the water they drink. They want clean air for their kids to breathe, whether at home or in their schools or at the park. And the causes of many of those issues are ultimately related to the causes of climate change too. A history of fossil fuel companies putting profit over the people. And so when people are going out to vote, especially environmentalists, those are the things they're thinking about. They're thinking about, how is their vote going to impact the health of their community?
Absolutely, yeah. And for those of you listening who haven't yet gotten a chance to vote, make sure you're getting out early. Making a plan to vote on election day. There's the vote early graphic, and it is so important that we do exercise our right to vote right now and fight to maintain our democracy, and use the power to make sure that we have to make sure that we don't have corrupt people running our legislatures and our governments. I know y'all were really involved in all the work around House Bill 6 and the fight against corruption. The outright bribery, that happened there. But as I said earlier, I know we're going to be talking about. I want to talk to you about the power outages that happened this summer. You were one of the first people I remember sort of seeing on some group threads with some work, and I was like, I need to talk to Chris about some of this stuff, because it was absolutely insane. Me in Columbus, being out of power for a week, with a toddler, having to go find hotel rooms and crash in people's spots. And when I think about the effects of climate change, it seems like Ohio is relatively insulated from some of the most drastic things, but we really felt it this summer. So I just wondered if you could talk a bit more about your experience with the power outages, your reflections on that whole situation.
Yeah, it really comes down to me that people are understanding issues like climate change and how they impact our basic needs in ways like never before. This power outage that hit Central Ohio is a really, really good example. For those who don't remember the details or don't live in Central Ohio, essentially what happened was a derecho of really big, powerful windstorms swept across Central Ohio. It impacted a variety of different areas of our transmission system. But that wasn't what really caused the power outage. What then happened was that a follow-up heat wave occurred that required a lot more electricity to be used. And so then it created this perfect storm where the increased need for power and the decreased transmission routes into Central Ohio caused certain sections of the grid to overload. And the big question that was on everyone's mind is like, how could this happen? It's 2022. Shouldn't we be prepared for these things? Why isn't our utility communicating to us? But people kept asking lots and lots of really, really good questions. And there's still, the Public Utilities Commission is still, investigating and finding more of these answers. But really what, I saw in that moment from both my friends and my family, who I fortunately did not lose my power, but I had friends who did. We were storing people's food in our fridge, those sorts of things. People were coming together in really, really cool ways to support each other, but also ask questions about, hey, how can we build a grid that doesn't have this happen in the future? Why does our grid work this way? Why couldn't it handle this sort of event? And the reality is with climate change, Ohio is going to be relatively safe. However, extreme weather events like a derecho and a heat wave during the summer are going to become more likely. One of the biggest impacts of climate change to Ohio that we're supposed to see over the next decades is increased precipitation, increased extreme weather events, increased heat waves in these moments of increased heat and intense heat. And those can create these perfect storms, and we need to be ready for that. We need to be building a grid that is ready for that. And I think we really see, that this moment, people ask those questions and people are seeing the connections between these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. For a long time, scientists have been, screaming from the rooftops about what's to come. And it feels like when we go through those actual moments, we actually have that lived experience of being deeply impacted by climate change and the realities in such visceral ways, like with the power outages, that it really accelerates the need to do something and people's awareness of it. And I know in those questions you asked, just like how do we make sure the grid is set up for the future? I know even in Nebraska that they've taken steps to where the people of Nebraska own their own grid, and as opposed to private companies. In Columbus, there is a municipal grid in Columbus. I know that grid didn't go down in the same way that the AEP grid did. I'm not on that grid, but there are some people on the south side who are. So I didn't even know we had two grids until that moment. So there's just so much that I feel like we just don't know about these things until everything shuts down. But so as we move forward, one question that we've been asking everybody, and we got this question from Eleanor Westerly from Minnesota, who and we make the future, who asked us, how would you describe your issue to a 7-year-old? And so I'm just wondering, when you're out there talking to folks, and you meet a young person and they ask you what you do, how are you explaining this issue to a 7-year-old?
That is such a great question. And the way I think everyone at the OEC would probably answer this question slightly differently. And that's one of the really cool things about the team that I get to work with, that everyone's kind of approaching environmental issues from a different lens. And for me, the way that I would describe it is that there's very rich and powerful interests. People continue to make money by not caring for our environment. They're not loving our environment. And we're fighting to kind of flip that table so that people of Ohio are in charge, and the future that Ohio kids have and the healthy communities they can grow up in is decided by Ohioans, as opposed to people who don't really care about the environment and want to just make money off of it.
Yeah, no, that's that runs it down. Of course, they'll ask you, what are special interests? What does that mean? No, that's great, Chris. So, are there any final words you want to share with people before we say goodbye to you?
Yeah, I would just say that I mean, people, we live in this crazy world right now where there's so much, thoughts coming from all sides. But like when it comes down to it, people need to get out and vote for their community and love their environment. No matter who or what candidates you are, interested in supporting, there's at the ballot local issues too, park levies, those sorts of things that like are real tangible things you can vote for that, and consider them closely, of course, but those are real tangible things you can think about really closely when you're going to the ballot. Even if you're not interested in individual candidates, take a look at the issues that are happening in your community.
All right, thank you so much, Chris. Keep up the good work. I'm sure I'll be seeing you soon. And everyone, make sure you follow OEC on all the social medias and find ways to get involved with the things that they're doing.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Oh, that was great. All right, cool. So up next, we are going to be hearing from Colette Ngana and Angelique or Leek Gates, maybe. I'm not sure if Leek is also joining us, but we're going to be talking about another really, really pressing issue, which over the summer became something that folks could no longer ignore anymore. I know we're talking about the Dobbs decision and the removal of Roe and the attack on reproductive rights and reproductive justice. For years, I know preterm and who y'all are representing today has and other reproductive justice activists have been telling folks, we have to be watching out for this. This is, Roe could fall, and people just didn't really believe it until it happened, or until the decision was leaked, sort of a month before. So I'm really, really excited to be talking with y'all. Abortion is one of the most important issues. I was reading an article today, just for Ohio voters, behind the economy and inflation, is like abortion is like the third most important issue for a lot of Ohioans. And so I think a lot of times in our progressive spaces, like we tend to like not talk about abortion. We tend to, kind of like, how do we bring it up? Like, do we even say the word? So I'm grateful to be talking with y'all, Colette and Leek, to learn more about what's been going on, how clinics like preterm have been impacted by the Dobbs decision, and how people can make a difference this November and moving forward in this fight for reproductive justice. So if we could have a moment of y'all's time, just introduce yourselves. I'll pass over to you, Colette, first. You share like just who you are, how you got involved in this fight, and maybe a little about what preterm does, so folks who aren't familiar with preterm can hear that. And we'll go pass over to you, Leek, after that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Colette. My pronouns are she, her. I chair the board of directors at Preterm, and I'm also a doctoral candidate in sociology at Case Western. I have been working in different capacities, different spaces when it comes to reproductive rights and justice since I was an undergraduate. So it's been a few years now. But specifically, I've been working with preterm since 2013, again, in sort of different volunteer capacities. Preterm is an abortion clinic in Cleveland. Our primary focus is providing safe and comprehensive abortion care to our community members and people who sort of, especially right now, sort of even what we would consider beyond our immediate community. We provide sort of the majority of abortion care in Northeast Ohio. So we are a prominent clinic. We've also been around for about 50 years. So we have a pretty long history of providing abortion care in Cleveland. So I'll pass it over to Leek.
Hey everyone, I'm not going to take up too much of your time. My name is Leek Gates. I am a senior strategist with Cleveland Votes. We are a nonpartisan democracy collective in Cleveland. Whoop, whoop. And I also am a board member of Preterm Cleveland. I've been doing the work with Colette for years. Have had the pleasure of watching Colette chair the board this year during all of the ups and the downs. We like to joke and say we've been in the trenches together, but it's always easier to do the work with your friends. And so just here, I'm going to defer a lot to Colette, let her talk a lot about ways that we all can get more activated in the reproductive world, because reproductive rights is healthcare. And so, yeah, I'm going to kick it back over to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both for being here. So yeah, I thought maybe we could start just by, Colette, maybe you can go first and just share some context with folks about how clinics have been impacted by the Dobbs decision. And also, what that means for how Ohioans, how people who need access to this care have been impacted.
Sure. So as you mentioned, at the end of June, it was June 24th, that the Supreme Court ruled on a decision, sort of a legal case that effectively reversed Roe v. Wade, which sort of granted a national level sort of legal right to abortion care, right? So in this case, abortion rights went back to the states, right? So now this is a state-by-state issue. So it's very apt to talk about how does this impact people in Ohio. The law and what is going on right now can be very confusing because it's shifting so much, right? So if there are people sort of tuning in and they're like, I'm not really sure what's going on, that's totally normal. And that's why we're sort of here to talk about it. But in terms of what's happening in Ohio, we have lawyers working with the ACLU and other organizations that are working to sort of fight the laws that are being put in place in Ohio. So these things like, if you've heard of like heartbeat bans or 6-week bans, right? So the way that lawyers are doing this is that they're focusing on the Ohio Constitution. So they're saying that under the Ohio Constitution, people have a right to abortion care, right? So under that, if people have sort of seen recently, there's been this, restraining order when it comes to some of these laws that have essentially allowed us to continue practicing, at least temporarily, back up to where we were before. So we're able to provide care around, up to like 20 to 21 weeks, right? And so when it comes to how does this impact Ohioans, of course, there's sort of this tenuous relationship to our abortion rights right now, right? So it's very dependent upon whether or not we have people in the court system or lawyers or politicians who are willing to sort of support abortion rights under the Ohio Constitution. So really, when we're talking about abortion care right now and why it's so important is that there's no longer sort of this national level protection. We really have to focus on what's going on in our state. So of course, when it comes to voting, we should think about how are we, who are we sort of voting for when it comes to, our local judges, our county prosecutors, and these people that really hold a lot of weight when it comes to local politics and sort of what is happening, not just, I'm based in Cleveland, not just in Cleveland, but in other parts of the state as well.
Yeah, just to echo kind of what Colette's saying, whenever I have conversations around voting and voting power, I often tell people to think about communities that might not affect you. And so while we say abortion is healthcare, it is. It's an issue that affects a lot of people. Something we also say, somebody you know and love may have had an abortion. Whether or not they told you, it might be whether or not they have that trust with you, but somebody you love that's had an abortion. And so just continuously having access to that is us exercising our voting power. And so when we go to the polls, thinking about who we vote for and why we're voting for them, thinking about the communities that, again, we might not touch, but like ways that we can tangentially think 2 towns over. Okay, 2 towns over, does this person have access to abortion care? I live in a greater metropolitan area where preterm is here, but people who might live an hour away might not have access to that. So how do we create spaces and create opportunities for them to be able to actively access it? And so that's essentially why we do the work that we do.
Awesome. No, and I love how y'all make the connection to, voting also in local elections and, the power that some of the, not obviously we have sort of our big statewide races this year for, governor and on down the ticket. Make sure you vote top to bottom in your ballot, vote for everything. But it's really important that people understand how certain local officials will really make a difference on how different laws are enforced and enacted and that kind of thing. So that's really great. So yeah, I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about actually the next question. Yeah, when I asked Chris, how would you explain your issue to a 7-year-old? So I'm going to ask you that same question, which is I think good for all of our progressive groups to be thinking about, because so often we can get really into the weeds and all the policies. So as you're out there talking to folks and you're engaging with younger people, how would you explain your issue?
I love Eleanor for this. I was in that training when Eleanor first showed us that, and I've actually adopted this practice. And so recently I had the opportunity to talk to some young athletes, and a lot of them were like, we're men, we don't think about abortion because we're male presenting bodies. And so I just took it back to, I was very basic in the concept actually. I was like, this morning when you decided to wake up and get dressed, who told you what to put on? And they were like, oh, me. I decided what to wear. And I was like, okay, how does it feel? How would you feel if somebody told you that you don't get to make choices over your body? And they looked at me and I was like, that's exactly what it feels like to take away reproductive access from people. People literally do not have access to make choices about what they want to do with their body. And we should all be able to do that no matter what age, no matter what gender. We should all be able to have access to do what we want to do with our bodies. And we need to have policies that reflect that. So that's typically how I have the conversation.
That's powerful, yeah.
Yeah, I think just sort of supporting that, I think that at the core of when we're talking about reproductive rights, reproductive justice, reproductive health, that there's, the thread that kind of runs through is this idea of like what it means to have, bodily autonomy, what it means to be able to make decisions over your body and what is right for you. So, I think that sort of idea is something that kids can very, I think, easily attach to. If I don't want to do something, I shouldn't be forced to do it. Or if I don't want someone to even like hug me, I should be forced to do it. And so this idea of being able to make decisions about something that feels right for you and then respecting someone else's decision about what feels right for them, I think can be very powerful in describing, reproductive rights or abortion care to children, I also know that there's a lot of difficulty in talking about, the complexities of why people, have abortions, or, people's health care that could be a little bit beyond, what maybe a 7-year-old could,
Yeah.
or, fully absorb. But sort of this idea, again, like what Leek said, that, we are really focused on making sure that we protect this ability to make decisions that are right for people, like for people to make decisions that are right for themselves. And then to also sort of, when it comes to voting in politics, to think about, are we voting in such a way that fosters that kind of community and environment, again, locally, but also more broadly at the state level. How can we do that so that people can protect their right to make these decisions?
Totally, yeah. And there's been so many like just losses when I think about the last year on this particular issue that we've had to endure, and there's been a lot of brilliant and amazing organizing response, and we've seen sort of an uprising to a certain degree. Folks who've been just, outraged by the Dobbs decision and getting involved for the first time in their lives, and this work. And so I'm just wondering, like, what are some things that are giving you hope as we look out at the landscape in Ohio? Some days it looks pretty bleak out here. So, how are you, maintaining yourselves in this work, and what's giving you hope?
I'll answer that first. So Leek is laughing because it's been a very difficult, especially June 24th. It's been a very difficult time, sort of sticking with, the demands of this work right now. As you're saying, like it has weighed very heavy on those of us who are doing repro justice work. But I think that one thing that gives me hope is that, we have at least temporarily brought back the right to provide abortion care to where we were providing previously. And so we have the ability to provide healthcare to our community members is a huge win, and something that brings me a lot of hope. I also feel very hopeful about the coalition work that is happening between organizations. So people who raise money for funding, so we can have access funds for sort of uninsured or lower income patients. People who are working on exactly sort of putting like putting the right to abortion on like an Ohio ballot, right? So that like the people of Ohio can vote on whether or not to make this a constitutional right, right? There are people that are doing that with organizations like Pro-Choice Ohio, right? And then, we also have sort of the healthcare arm with a network of independent clinics working together to sort of see like, how can we provide care, not just in Ohio, but outside of Ohio if necessary. So, primarily right now, like abortion is still very much legal in Ohio. I want to make that very clear for everybody who's listening in, but
Yeah.
that, there are people who are working very hard to sort of solidify and codify this right that we have. And I think that the momentum, more people who have not been in this work before are really reaching out and saying, how can we help? Where can we donate? How can we volunteer, do things like being a clinic escort, right? So I would just say that if you're interested in joining, to just ask like, what, can I help with a fundraising event, or can I canvas, or, these very sort of like easy ways to just work with community members on an issue that, is important to you. So those are the things that give me a lot of hope.
Yeah, I did laugh, but truthfully speaking, one of the biggest things that gives me hope is seeing the people that are dedicated in the work, having access to people who give their lives to making sure that other people have body autonomy and agency is really honestly, it's an honor. It's a huge reason why I do the work that I do. I've had the pleasure of just watching the staff at Preterm just work vigilantly for years. And so that does give me hope because there are people that genuinely put themselves in places to help others. And like Les said, we always need help. So anything like just, being a clinic escort, while it's a really difficult task and a difficult job, it's really helpful and it helps a lot of people who need access to that care. Also donate. I mean, let's keep it real. Dollars help. I will always say dollars make us holler. Yes. So yes, if you guys have funds, while we love skills, we also love funds. So yeah, please donate because these clinics are working really, really hard to stay open. Places like Abortion Fund of Ohio are working really hard. Ohio Women's Alliance, so I was going to shout them out. Our sisters in the work, and yeah. So the hope is the work is still here. The work is still being done. It will still be done because people will always need access to care.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you both so much. You answered my next question, which was going to be how can people help? Where can people, send their resources, their money, and their time? So I see there's a link that was just shared there, and the website preterms link I see is in the chat as well. So please get involved however you can. Talk to your friends, your family, your neighbors about these issues. And Colette and Malik, thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you all have a great rest of your week and weekend, and keep up the work. Thank you so much for everything that y'all do to make Ohio a better place for all of us.
Thanks, James. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Appreciate y'all. All right, cool. That was really powerful. And thank everyone who made it to the end and tuned in at all to hear from Chris from OEC, or Colette and Leek from Preterm about the important work that their organizations are doing to fight for climate justice and reproductive justice. Obviously, all these issues are so interconnected, but each of these organizations is on the different front lines. So it's really cool to see how that work overlaps in different ways and how people are also fighting their own fights. There's only a couple weeks left till this election, so make sure you get out and vote early. There we go. Make your plan to vote by election day, and make your voice heard. Next week, we're going to be hearing from some of the powerful leaders who are working on issue 1, and it's going to be a really important conversation about the landscape around bail reform and criminal justice issues. So look forward to that next week. Thank you all for tuning in. My name is James Hayes, pronouns he, him, his, with Ohio Voice. Thanks for tuning into the Narrative Avengers.